We're going to be tackling some of the major sacred cows of the health industry and how those are actually incorrect or wrong, or were proven to be incorrect and wrong. And so the point being, we want to make sure that you understand that the science is never settled. Somebody tells you science is settled, run the other way. So let's dive in to the topic of health advice gone wrong. So topic number one, you have bad genes. This was kind of, and still is actually even to this day, this is one of the favorite things that I hear many doctors say is when they can't answer the question to their patients, they just simply blame it on genetics. Your mom had diabetes, your dad had diabetes, heart disease, whatever it might be. But science has actually proved this wrong, and it's been proven wrong for quite a number of years, but it's still a favorite go-to. As a matter of fact, if we go back as far as 10 years, you can see here on this cover of a Time magazine, you can see why your DNA isn't your destiny, the science of epigenetics. You know, we were talking about this over 10 years ago. You know, it's been written about, there have been a number of major studies on genetics, what we call nature versus nurture. In essence, most of what doctors call genetics as far as disease risk factor is not genetic, but it actually comes from nurturing, the way you were raised. You learned how to eat, you learned how to behave, you learned how to exercise. All your behaviors were taught. So more than saying you have a cursed genome, we should probably say you were taught how to do things that were conducive to the development of disease, which has nothing to do with your genetics. And so if you change your choices, you can change your life. And we've learned this over the years, and especially through twin studies where doctors look at twins and the development of different diseases based on different environments. And so it's pretty well confirmed at this point that genes are not the major role. They play a role, no doubt about that, in disease, but they are not the reason for the most part that people develop disease. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, certainly. Diseases like cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, you know, genetic inborn errors of metabolism, but these are very rare situations. And again, most people have a great degree of control over their disease destiny if they adjust their behaviors accordingly. So we know that genes being bad are definitely a myth, and it's been one of the major excuses of the medical community for many decades. Number two on our list, smoking is just fine. Now, we all know today that that reality is far from the truth. As a matter of fact, smoking's been linked to heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, obesity, and a number of other chronic degenerative diseases, including asthma and lung disease. But there was a time in our history where smoking was perfectly fine and was recommended, and marketers used aggressively, I should add, they used doctors to promote this habit. You can see here we've got some old ads up. Viceroys, filter the smoke, right, with the big exclamation point. You've got a dentist here. I love this. As your dentist, I would recommend Viceroys. So again, this an old ad that was used. You can see here this one. I love this. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And again, you got a picture of the doctor with the stethoscope, smooth cigarette in the hands. And then you've got this one. I love this ad. It's a mother and her daughter in the doctor's office. You can see up here on the left-hand side, I'm going to grow 100 years old. That's what we call marketing. And then down below that, you've got a smoking ad. So smoking being associated with living longer. And then keep going, Lucky Strike. This is a pretty famous one here. 20,679 physicians say Luckies are less irritating. I don't know what that means, but they go on to say it's toasted. Your throat protection against irritation, against cough. So again, doctors promoting that brand. And then Camels, again, for digestion's sake, smoke Camels. Again, a doctor in the ad. We've got more. You can see why physicians call our new brand a health cigar. That's really pushing it, a health cigar. But again, this is our history, and you have to find humor in it. I mean, this is advice. For all intents and purposes, this is even if it's not directly physicians giving the advice to smoke, it's definitely pushing the envelope of what should have been legally plausible. You get here, you got dentists vote Old Gold first for throat ease. Again, smoking. Camel, smoke as many as you want. They never get on your nerves. More doctors smoke Camel. Again, that was a big one, the Camel ads. I like this. Leading nose and throat specialists suggest that you change to Philip Morris for whatever reason. I think the message there for quite a while was that certain brands would irritate the throat less. I don't know how true any of that could have ever been. Again, Camels, what distinguished doctors found on comparing cigarettes call for Philip Morris, America's finest cigarette. So again, no shortage here. Just what the doctor ordered, filter tip. I think that the advent of filters somehow made cigarettes healthier. Of course, again, we know the story. I think you get the point, but cigarettes are not okay. But we were being pushed and we were being prodded in the direction of smoking. Certainly there was a social influence. It wasn't just ads by these companies using doctors as pawns. It was also the movies and the TV, promoting the coolness of smoking cigarettes. You remember the guys in the 50s with the white T-shirts and the pack of cigarettes rolled up in the sleeve, and they were tough because they were smokers. And so we've seen this be pushed socially for many years, and of course we know it's not true. And that's my point. Sometimes things our society promotes and pushes are not necessarily what's good for the order. And bonus to anyone who in the comments can bring up a recent example of how society pushed the rest of us to do something that may not have been the best idea. Okay, let's go to number 3. We've got here baby formula, right? If you remember, there was a time when doctors aggressively promoted baby formula in the hospital and pediatric setting over breastfeeding. And certainly this is another example of how society got behind and pushed this mass message. I mean, women were going back to work. Breastfeeding was considered more of a hassle, if you will, as opposed to well, let's just call it a nutritional necessity for healthy young babies. And I'm not shaming any of you who didn't breastfeed, so please keep the comments to yourself if that's what you think. That's not at all what I mean here. But what we're referring to is how aggressive baby formulas were marketed. You can see here formula makers distribute free formula to hospitals, encourage doctors and healthcare workers to give mothers free samples, and use social media influencers to advertise formula benefits to expecting new mothers. Strategies that undercut efforts to support breastfeeding, health experts say. Go on to say, formula milk marketing powered by enormous budgets and the deliberate misuse of science, again, that word science, right? Science is never settled, is driving overconsumption of formula milk and discouraging breastfeeding. The World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Fund found in a February report. The formula industry systematically undermines parents' infant feeding decisions, the report said, comparing the efforts to tobacco and gambling marketing. So again, we go back in time. If we look at the historical lessons that time can teach us, we allowed, because of undue financial influence, we allowed the cigarette and the smoking industry to lie to us for decades and to promote something that was killing millions of people. And doctors were promoting it as well, until we finally came to the conclusion that was wrong. It was because the evidence became so overwhelming we could no longer ignore it. Same thing with formula, with baby formula. If you ever go to the grocery store and look at some of these formulas, many of them, the number one ingredient is corn syrup, sugar, pure fructose, which we'll talk about later, but that's horrific, right? We don't want to feed our children, our growing babies, a primary staple of fructose is calories. And beyond that, the number of synthetic vitamins and other potentially allergenic dairy-based products that are highly, highly processed that don't even come close to mother's milk. Again, not trying to guilt or shame any of you who didn't breastfeed. But, you know, if you didn't, you very well could have been a victim of this marketing campaign, this really, really heavy push. Remember, these companies spent millions and millions of dollars to get their products into your hands and to create a social idea that somehow breastfeeding was less important. And so, you know, we all played a victim to that. I was not breastfed as a child, and probably like many of you, and many of you maybe haven't breastfed your own children, and because that belief or that mantra still exists today, and we're now hopefully starting to make a dent in this equation. But breastfeeding is super critical and super important. So if you can and you produce milk and you're able to do so, it's absolutely the best choice for your child. Okay, let's move into number 4. The only war on cancer is the one promoting you to develop it. Now, we always hear about the war on cancer. You've got big companies that do fund runs every year to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for cancer research, and very little of that research money ever makes it into research that matters. Most of it funds chemo and radiation trials. Of course, the success and track record of those types of therapies is very poor, especially when you look at 5-year survival rates for a lot of cancers. But again, our culture and our society believes it's the thing to do. When you get cancer, you go to places like MD Anderson and go through that whole process that they have set up for you, and never really even question it. And again, when people get cancer, what is it that many doctors say? They say, diet has nothing to do with cancer. You need to treat it. And they go right into heavy treatments. Now, no cancer was ever caused by a deficiency of chemotherapy or radiation or lack of surgical removal of a tumor, but many cancers are caused by the day-to-day things that we do. Let's look at what the National Cancer Institute has to say about risk factors for cancer. You can see their list here: age, alcohol, cancer-causing substances, we'll talk about that in a minute, chronic inflammation, diet, hormones, immunosuppression, infectious agents, obesity, radiation, sunlight, and tobacco, all causes of cancer or contributors to cancer. Ironically, you see radiation is one of the forms of treatment used commonly for many different types of cancer. But you know, if we look at some of these things, cancer-causing substances, for example, pollutants, you can see a long list here that, again, that the Institute says are carcinogens. So you see aflatoxins, which, by the way, are toxins found in foods. They're mold toxins also found in many homes produced by species of mold like Aspergillus. And then you've got arsenic and asbestos and benzene. Again, a lot of these are petrochemicals or heavy metals. Coal tar and coal tar pitch. A lot of food dyes are coal tar derivatives, interestingly enough. You know, those FD&C dyes that are put in a number of foods and cosmetics. You can see here mineral oils, nickel compounds, radon, secondhand tobacco smoke, soot, vinyl chloride, wood dust. Okay, and a lot of just environmental chemicals, household environmental chemicals, formaldehyde, preservatives, etc. So these are all components environmentally that contribute to cancer. And then we have dietary components that obviously contribute to cancer. Probably some of the biggest things in diet are the chemicals we put in the food, the pesticides, the preservatives, and other potential for carcinogenic effect, not good for you items. So read those food labels and try to pick what's good or what's healthy. But again, what we're getting at here, you know, society as a whole really promotes the development of cancer. So we, again, going back to, we have this war against cancer, yet as a society we promote so many things that contribute to it. The petrochemicals, the pesticides in our food, the preservatives, the dyes, the lack of activity. You know, in our schools today, activity is not promoted. Children are locked down to a desk and there's very little time for physical fitness or activity. You know, we have fast food and convenience foods that are promoting of cancer. The fried foods are promoting of cancer. So all these modern day conveniences that we have that go into contributing to cancer. So as a society, if we really wanted to battle or go to war against cancer, We wouldn't be doing fun runs where they're serving Coca-Cola and donuts to raise money to do research that promotes the use of very dangerous medicines like chemotherapy and radiation poisoning as the means to treat a disease. We would be going backward and reverse engineering what are these environmental triggers and how can we be exposed to less of them? How can we change the way things are done so that we are being exposed to less carcinogenic compounds throughout the course of our life so as to minimize the risk of developing cancer? Number 5, high-fat diets cause heart disease. Now, many of you are maybe aware of this recent expose, if you will, but it was published a few years ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine. You can see here, Sugar Industry and Coronary Heart Disease Research, a historical analysis. So in this abstract or summary, you see early warning signals of coronary heart disease risk of sugar emerged in the 1950s. So this is, we're going back 70 years. What these researchers did is they examined Sugar Research Foundation internal documents, historical reports, and statements relevant to early debates about the dietary causes of coronary heart disease and assembled findings chronologically into a narrative case study. The Sugar Research Foundation sponsored its first CHD research project in 1965, a literature review published in the New England Journal, which singled out fat and cholesterol as the dietary causes of coronary heart disease and downplayed evidence that sucrose consumption was also a risk factor, sucrose being sugar. The SRF, Sugar Research Foundation, set the review's objective, contributed articles for inclusion, and received drafts. The SRF's funding and role was not disclosed. Together with other recent analysis of sugar industry documents, our findings suggest the industry sponsored a research program in the 60s and 70s that successfully cast doubt about the hazards of sucrose while promoting fat as the dietary culprit in coronary heart disease. Now, what do most people think causes atherosclerosis and heart disease today? Cholesterol, fat. Well, cholesterol technically isn't just pure fat, it's fat with protein. It's a lipoprotein. But, what do you see in the grocery store on the cereal boxes? Lowers your cholesterol. Oat cereals, my favorite one is Honey Nut Cheerios. A sugar-loaded, grain-based cereal is going to lower your cholesterol and reduce your risk of heart disease. Yeah, good luck with that. Point being that industry funded scientists to lie. And where have we seen that before? This is a trend historically that we see repetitively over and over and over again. And I say that because you have to question things. If you're not questioning things, you become the victim to good marketing, which we've all been a victim of good marketing. But as you learn the history, you learn not to repeat the same mistakes. The sugar industry funded a trick, right? They basically blamed everything on fat and cholesterol. And what do we have now? We have a multi-billion-dollar industry revolving around the lowering of cholesterol with chemicals that can cause muscle damage and nerve damage. And, people just accept that as scientific fact and truth, and there's no questioning to the doctors. And I would encourage any of you who are, taking cholesterol-lowering drugs, to rethink that concept. We're learning today, I shouldn't say we're learning, we've already learned this, but it's just not mainstream knowledge that cholesterol is vital to health. As a matter of fact, people with the highest levels of cholesterol live longer, and we're talking about bad cholesterol, the LDL. People with the highest LDL have longer lifespans. We also know in 1998, LDL, bad cholesterol, won a Nobel Prize in medicine because it was discovered you needed it to form brain synapses. And this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of people developing cognitive brain fog and neurodegenerative change when they lower their cholesterol too aggressively over years and years and years. So again, sugar's bad for you. Sugar contributes to heart disease. The sugar industry paid scientists to cover it up and blame cholesterol, and that's a part of our dirty history that you want to be aware of.